I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
History. Welcome back to America Decides. When then President Lyndon Johnson announced he would not run again in March 1968, it did rock American politics. His list of legislative achievements at the time was long, but Johnson had faced a backlash over his handling of Vietnam. So what does this all mean for the presidential election as we look both back and forward? Well, to help us understand all of that, presidential historian, the great Douglas Brinkley joins us now. Doug, great to have you here. Thanks for being with us. When you think about Johnson's decision in 1968, it was such a turbulent time in America with the military, in American politics, with race relations. Do you see echoes of 1968 in Johnson's decision now, or is that a stretch, historically speaking?
Well, it's not a complete stretch. And obviously, the fact that we have the Democratic Convention in Chicago this August, the same thing happened in 1968. So there are going to be these comparisons made. Keep in mind, Lyndon Johnson started 68 with the Tet Offensive happening in Vietnam. He had been living and dining on "There's light at the end of the tunnel" in Vietnam. We're winning, which was General Westmoreland's line. Lo and behold, Tet belied that. And what Johnson did first off right was bring in real advisors. I don't mean family. I don't mean friends. I don't mean sycophants. He brought in all sorts of people like Dean Acheson. And at one point, Lyndon Johnson, before he dropped out on the footage you're showing, asked the great former Secretary of State Lyndon Johnson, why am I going down in the polls? What is it? Why are I'm not likable? What's going on here? And Acheson had the temerity to look at Johnson and said, because, Mr. President, you're not a very likable fellow. And the point being, I think Joe Biden has, if you surround yourself with yes people and family, you're not realizing and you say polls are all made up and the media's out to get you and, these are all lies around you, then you start becoming insular. Johnson, to his credit, read the tea leaves, recognized that he would be better off stepping down. Health was a consideration, too, for Johnson. And what we forget is that LBJ actually got a wave of approval after he stepped down, which got mired after Martin Luther King Jr. gets assassinated and RFK. And so it becomes chaotic 68. But most historians think Johnson did a heroic thing when he made the effort to look at the reality of the situation and step down.
When we look back to 1968, President Johnson seemed to have a bit of a hand in making sure that Hubert Humphrey emerged as the Democratic nominee. As Democrats look at the possibility of President Biden stepping away, though every person I know close to President Biden says he's all in, he's staying in. Do presidents have power ahead of a convention if they have the pledged delegates to try to influence the process or not?
They do, but if he stepped down, the only person he could give all of the delegates to is Kamala Harris. So I truly feel she is the person of the moment. If he stepped down, it would have to go to her. I know there are other scenarios where you put, 5 people in Chicago and all, but then it gets very tricky on the delegate count. So Biden's in the driver's seat. Only he can decide, but he needs to expand his network of advisors. And I think in the end, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama may be the deciders. If they can team up, they are probably the only ones that can break through the Joe Biden and his White House team and maybe say to Biden, you got to step down. Let's turn it over to Kamala, and she'll become. He could even step down from the presidency, Biden, if he wanted, and Kamala could be president of the United States overnight, the first woman in U.S. history. I doubt any of this is happening. I think Biden will probably go forward to be the nominee, but this is the moment of decision. And we do think back to LBJ in 68 as an option Biden has to say, my time's up.
The big news, Doug, today, the immunity ruling by the Supreme Court. As someone who studies the presidency, writes about the presidency, thinks about the presidency, how do you see this Supreme Court ruling and what it means for presidential power in the wake of everything that happened with Richard Nixon 50 years ago and everything that now lies ahead?
Well, as you know, there's an incredible moment when Richard Nixon, as ex-presidents, on the David Frost, BBC interview, and Nixon said he believed that the president does it, it's legal. And Donald Trump has long been a Nixonian person, and he believes that anything he does, if he's president, he should be allowed to get away with it. And lo and behold, in his case of the United States versus Donald Trump, or Donald Trump versus USA, Trump has won. And this is the gold star day for Trump, because it is clear there will be, and nothing more done about this till after the election. And if Trump wins, this immunity, ability to have full immunity, is something that we've never experienced in our country before. It allows Trump an extraordinary amount of executive power. And to be fair to our founders, or maybe not fair, they never really grappled with what is executive power. I mean, we really didn't have executive orders. I mean, we sometimes call Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation Executive Order number 1. It's not quite accurate. We don't have time to get into what, but by Theodore Roosevelt, and then by the 30s with FDR, you see this vast increase of an executive power to the point that FDR tried to add more Supreme Court justices, 6 extras, to rubber stamp the New Deal. Now we're seeing that it's no longer liberal left. It's a moment of conservative or right-wing revolution in our country, and the court is our work for the Federalist Society. This has been a long-range plan of increasing presidential power of the Federalist Society to deregulate America, if you like, since the Nixon years, because Nixon did EPA, affirmative action, and the like. We're now rolling back the tide to a pre-Nixon era with the Supreme Court.
And we are living in history, and we're glad to have a historian so highly esteemed to help us understand it all. Douglas Brinkley, thank you.
Thank
President
you.
narrowly won.